So it's fine. You can leave it on your capable hand.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems that everything is now working, hopefully, except for earring 204, which still has the projector with a screen that flickers. All right, so welcome to finally practical lecture 1. Hopefully next week we don't have so much problems, but based on how this week is going, I'm not going to say anything about next week. All right, so what we're going to have a look at today is a topic we sort of brushed on in the lectures, and that is documentation. So with documentation in Java, certain things are different than C++. In Java, there's a way that we as programmers can write documentation that can be available to other programmers without exposing the source code to those other programmers. Usually in C++ code, if you wanted to convey some sort of information, you had to have your source code available either through the header file or through the CPP file as well to indicate how to use something or how to work with something. In Java, there's a built-in mechanism for displaying the actual documentation of classes or methods, etc., that you might be using or want to use in the future. So what we're going to have a look at is this documentation mechanism called JavaDoc, and specifically JavaDoc comments, the way of commenting your code to display these comments properly. So before I go into the structure of JavaDoc comments, I just want to show you an example of JavaDoc comments. And this example is from the Oracle website. So this is where one of the developers, one of the companies behind Java, this is the person that's hosting, or the company that's hosting the Java documentation for every version of Java. So from version 6 up until now, we have version 17. It's hosting the documentation for the default available classes, packages that are inside Java itself. So with Java version 9 onwards, there's something called modules as well as packages. We're not going to discuss modules in detail, but basically it's another way of packaging certain content. Okay, so it seems like another projector is not working. I'm not going to wait any more time trying to get it to work. You can always look at the venue on the other sides to see what the actual content there. Okay, so hopefully now Blackboard can see everything. Okay, so what I was saying was that we're going to look at Java.comments. comments. So what we're going to do now is look at the Java documentation for the JDK 17 API. So API is application programming interface. It's a way you interface with a certain application. In this case here, we're interfacing with Java itself. And there's a whole bunch of different packages, modules here. And inside of those, we'll have specific packages. Now, we're not going to go through all of them, but the ones which I want to highlight and have a look at is in the Java base module. And here, what you'll see is the things that live in Java Lang. Java Lang is the things that are available in the Java language itself. So you can see here, it gives you the name of the package and a description of what that package is about. And you can see there's other things here looking at there's math, so all the math libraries. So you can see it's things here like big integer, big decimal. You can see there's something called net. That's for anything to do with networking. There's something called NIO, which is non-blocking IO with networks. There's some things for security. There's some things for text. And one of the ones which I want to have a look at, because we sort of looked at this class previously, is looking at Java util. So Java util is a package where we can contain some utility classes available. And if you click on that in this documentation, what you'll see is there's something about different packages that are available, sub-packages that are here. And we can also look at the available interfaces, classes, enum classes, something we'll discuss in the next lecture, exceptions, errors. But the thing I want to look at is the classes, and specifically, you'll see there's something called arrays. So in lecture 1, we looked at, or lecture 2, we looked at arrays. So Java util arrays. If I click on that, it will give me documentation on all the methods that are available in this specific class. So here you can see there is static int, so that's a modifier type. What is the method? So binary search, and it tells me the parameters. And you can see it gives me all the different overloaded parameters. Remember, overloaded means that it's the same name, different parameters, maybe different return type, but it gives me all the ones available for binary search. There's all the ones for compare, and so on and so forth. You can go and read up on each of these different things. Now, if I, for example, want to look at the details of a single method, you can click on that method in this documentation interface. It will take you to some more information about that method, and it will tell you what the different parameters are, and if it happens to return something. So let me just find a method that actually returns something. So here, for example, there's an equals method. It takes in a couple of parameters. It has a return. So you can see there it says that when it returns, what does it return? It returns true if the two arrays are equals, if you call this specific method called equals. So other questions I got is, how do we know what methods to use in Scanner? There is the documentation for the Scanner class. Click on it, and it will show you some examples of doing Scanner. So here is a simple example where you take in system in, because remember that's the input for our standard input. Wrap it up in a scanner, and if I want to get the integer from the user, I call next int. If the user types in something that's not an integer, you run into problems, but if it works properly, you'll get back an integer and you can work with it as you would any sort of other integer that you could work with. There's some examples of showing you how to do some error checking. So here there's a method called has next long instead of just calling next long. So has next long, the has next methods all test if something is available before actually calling the method to commit getting that back from the user. So there's a lot more examples here. I'm not going to go through everything. This is all documentation written by the people who created the scanner class in order for you to understand how to use it. So this is general documentation. As you scroll down, you'll see there's different constructors. And for each of the constructors, for example, if you look at system in is an input stream. So we probably want to look at the constructor for that. If you click on it, it will give you details about that constructor. If you look at the methods that are available, you can see there's a lot of methods. There's has next. So there's has next decimal, big decimal, boolean, byte, etc. So there's a whole bunch of has next methods, and there's also a whole bunch of next methods. And there you can see the example of next line. We've seen that in the Hello World program inside of lecture 1. And if you click on that, you can see how does the next line method actually work. It tells you what happens and what does it return. It also tells you if there's any problems that can occur. So here, for example, it says there throws, and in this case here, it throws exceptions when there are problems when you call the specific method. So this method can throw exceptions, and something we'll talk about in detail in a future lecture, but that's another way we can document certain methods to indicate there is some sort of problem that can occur, and these are the exceptions that will get thrown. So when you're writing your own classes, it's very important that you do this documentation as well. So far, the documentation you have been doing is inline comments or block comments. So if you look at this slide over here on line number 11, what you can see is a regular inline comment. So you got your double forward slash and then your comment, or what you have is your forward slash asterisk that will indicate a block comment, and this can run over many lines. Java comments are slightly different in the syntax. You'll see there's a double asterisk, double star at the beginning of every Java comment. And this gives us a way to work with Java comments and output those kind of web pages that will describe what our classes actually do. So you get a couple of places where you can include Java comments. It doesn't fit in everywhere. For everywhere else, you can use normal, regular comments. But for special places, such as before a class or before a constructor or a method, those are going to be places where you can write documentation for that class or for the method inside of that class. In order to make this information available to the JavaDoc program and therefore available in the JavaDoc web page, like we see over here, we need a way to be able to specify things like a general comment, things like something returns something. We need to provide a comment on when it returns something, a comment on the parameters. And the way we do that is through something called JavaDoc tags. So the tags are basically a way to specify something inside of a JavaDoc comment. These are not all the tags. These are the ones we are going to be using in the course. Obviously, there are a lot more. However, we can't cover every single one of them. So the first one you'll see here in this list is something called @author. This indicates who is the author or contributor towards the source code of this class. What are you going to use this for is you are going to indicate whenever you create a class, you're going to indicate that you are the author of that specific class. If there's a case of multiple authors, in the case of I provide you code or Mr. Tungu provides you code, then obviously there'll be multiple authors because I've given you code and you've extended it. Most of the time you'll try and avoid this, but there can be situations where that does happen. And other than that, there should be no other authors. Your friend should not be authoring any classes with you, which means that your friend worked with you on a practical. Definitely not the case when you submit your practicals. You should be working on them on your own. The next few are looking at trying to work with specific methods. So @param and @return define specifically parameters and then returns. So when you say @param, you provide a name of a parameter and what does that parameter actually do? What is the expected types? What is expected values? What does happen under certain values? So for example, if one of the parameters is a Boolean value, what happens when it's true? What happens when it's false? You can provide that documentation after this @param tag. @return, when the method returns, what does it return? If it returns true, what does that mean? If it returns a Boolean value, so is it true means it's successful, false means it's not successful, true means it worked correctly, or false means it worked incorrectly, or something along those lines. It could return a number, it could return an integer, it could return a string. You can provide details to whoever's calling this specific method as to what actually happens when they receive a certain value. The next few are to assist with trying to work with related classes. So @C is to say that, okay, you're calling this method, you might want to look at these other methods that are available. So @C says go and look at these other things. Then we also have @link, so that will link, put a link, a clickable link in the web page where you can go to see other classes or other methods. And then the last thing here is @version to indicate what version is the actual class or method you are working with. So for example, you might start with version 1, and as you progress through, you might increase the version numbers depending on what you're doing. So you could have a class that started out as version 1, and as time progresses, as more functionality is added, you might see the class increased to version 2, version 3, etc. Javadoc tool we'll come back to in just a moment. We need a way to actually create those web pages, and we'll talk about how we do that in a moment. You can see here we're actually going to put something in our batch file. But what I want to look at is an example of a class where we can see the Javadoc tag. So I'm actually going to zoom in here. So what you can see here is there's a class called shipping box. Doesn't matter what this class is, it's just for example. And before the class, you can see there is a Javadoc comment for the class itself. So this will be the comment at the beginning of our Javadoc for this class, indicating all the different things that need to happen for this. Now, this is only going to show basic information, because obviously I need to fit this into the slide. You can include as much detail as you want over here. Things that are important to put here are things like author. That's where your author tag should go, and your details should be there. Student number, surname, initials. And version. This will be, if you, for example, if you're doing practical 1, you'll put there P00, or sorry, 01. In this case here, this is practical lecture 1, so that's why it's PL1. And then if there are related classes, we haven't done multiple classes just yet, but if there are other classes, you can put there @C and then name some other classes. Now, inside of the actual class itself, you'll see there are some things here indicating instance variables. We haven't talked about this yet in the lectures, but this is how you would do instance variables. Similar to how you had instance variables in C++, where you have your public, private sections, and you put instance variables just there next to methods. With Java, we have to qualify everything first, so you have to put the modifiers first for everything. So this will indicate a shipping label as a string that is an instance variable of this class called shipping box. So these instance variables we cannot put Javadoc comments for. So that's why you'll see there are normal comments specified here. For the constructor, we can specify Javadoc comments. So you can see there we do have the syntax for the start of a Javadoc comment, and you'll notice on each line it also begins the line with the star as well. And here we can see there's the comment for the constructor, and then for each of the parameters, it gives us some information about what the parameters are for. This variable name has to match up with the parameter name down here. So whatever you put here after @param has to match up. If it doesn't match up, your tool, your Javadoc tool, which we're going to use, will complain about it and say that it's not correct. Here's another method available here. So constructors are technically also methods that just return an instance of the thing. So here we have a method for called open, and here we can see the use of @param again, but also @return to indicate what does this method actually return. Again, there is no logic. This is just for example, so you don't have to worry about what's happening in the actual method itself. What we're interested in is the comments that are available for our specific class that we have here. So if we look at this class and we run it through our Javadoc tool, we'll show you how to do that in just a moment. What you'll see is you'll see a constructor, and it will show you what does the constructor actually look like, what is the comments for it, and then it will tell you about the parameters. Just like we had inside of that documentation, this will create a separate web page, just like we saw on the official documentation. It will create a separate web page for you. You don't have to learn how to do HTML and CSS. It's all done for you. And it will be able to, you can be able to read the documentation without actually looking at the source code. And for the method, basically it's the same information available again. It will tell you about the method signature, and then what are the parameters and what does it actually return. All right, so the way we get that web pages to actually generate is by using another command line tool, in this case called Javadoc. So we got Java C, which is a compiler, Java, which is our Java JVM runtime environment. And now we have something called Javadoc, which will generate Java documentation from the classes we specify. Now, the command we specify here is going to be a bit different than the one I'm going to use today. And the reason for that is we haven't talked about packages yet. So this will only make sense once we discussed the next lecture. So this is what's going to be in the final version of the batch file. But for today, because we haven't done that just yet, I'm not going to show you with packages. But if we look at the syntax here, so we've got Java doc, which is the name of the command line tool. We've got a number of parameters. Remember, it's the name of the program and then the parameter list. So here we're specifying source path. Where do I find my source code? And there you can see the variable names which we specified before. So prac source, just as we had in the batch files last week. Class path. Now here it's going to be something different because one of the things we didn't specify was a lib folder. It was mentioned in the practical itself that you could have a lib folder. So this again is for future proofing purposes, but it's not required. We're just going to work with prac_bin as our class path. Then we have something called use, and that's just to make sure the next two things work correctly, the version and the author. So by default, it's not enabled. You have to tell Javadoc to use the version and the author. And then -d indicates where do we want to output the generated files. Now we're not going to just dump it in pracdocs because that's where our batch file lives. We don't want it to get contaminated, so we put it into a subfolder called javadocs. And then this last option here just specifies we want to generate the javadoc documentation for all the things inside of the CSC02A package. So we're not using that just yet, but that's what this last option actually does. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into my folder. So this is the one which we've been using so far all the time. So I have still my source code in my source folder. I got my batch file in my docs folder. I have my bin folder. And this should still work correctly. We can double check that this does what it needs to do. So on the lecture yesterday, we looked at which method this specific thing call. So that's still what's going to run here. So let's just confirm that it is the case. Okay, so it looks like it's running correctly. So we're not going to mess around with the commands we already have. It's compiling fine. It's running fine. The only thing we need to do is generate our Javadoc. So inside of here, we're going to add another section. So remember, echo just prints out the actual text that comes in after echo. So if I looked here at the screen, let me just make this a little bit bigger. So you can see there, it says compile and then runs all the commands for compiling. Runs all the commands for running, the output of the program, and then finish when we end with the batch file. So all we're doing is we're just putting another section which will say Javadoc, and that will run our Javadoc tool. Now we just want to make sure we do have the Javadoc tool available. So because I set up the path already, this should work. And you can see it's saying that we didn't specify any modules, packages, or classes. So by default, it doesn't give us the help. So we can always ask for help. So I provided the -help, and that will give us the usage of the specific program. So you can see you can specify Javadoc, some options, package names, source files, or add files. And again, you can read through and check all of the different options that are available. We sort of saw what we need inside of the lecture slide. So we need to specify our source path. So let's do that. And our source path is our prac source. Other things we need is our class path, and that's going to be our prac_bin. And then -d, as we used it for our Java C, that's our output folder. So output folder, we want to specify, okay, there's a couple of other things which I forgot. Let's just put those things as well. So that was the before dash D. We just want to have the use to indicate that we want to have the next available tags as well. So dash version to make sure version appears correctly, and then dash author to make sure the author appears correctly. And then we want to specify where our output is. So we're not going to just dump it over, everything is going to get dumped here. We're going to put it into a subfolder. So I want to specify that we want the output of this to be in pracdoc slash javadoc or javadocs. I think that's the with an S. Yep, with an S in the lecture. So we'll keep it like that. And then we still need to specify what classes we want. So at the moment, we're only working with one class. So that's the class I'm going to specify. But when we get to packages and we work with packages, we'll specify only creating javadoc for the classes that actually matter. Now, that's not to say that this is all going to work. The only way we'll know it will work is when we actually run this. So I'm going to turn off, I'm going to turn on echo again so we can see all the commands running, just so we can see any problems. And another thing I'm going to change is I'm just going to have pauses after each step. So after compilation, I'm going to have a pause. After javadoc, I'm going to have a pause. And then after running, there's a pause. Okay, so I'm going to run my batch file again. What we should see is it sets up the path again, compiles, pauses, does javadoc, pauses, and you can see there's some problems. Okay, and running works. So there was some issues. So let's just go and try and fix that. Okay. Try that again. Okay. So the reason why it's making funny things there, so you can see there's weird characters getting displayed there, and that's because PDF text is a bit different than text you can see in ASCII. So that might fix the one issue. We'll find out now. There we go. Right. So the tool ran. So javadoc tool did run. So I fixed that problem. The problem was the dashes were not the right type of dash, even though it looked the same. It was not ASCII values, but so that fixed that problem. And what you see is when the javadoc tool runs, it will tell you loading source file, and then it will try and compile that. If you have multiple files, it will tell you each one loading this file, and it will tell you what problems it occurs for that specific thing. So you can see it says constructing javadoc information, creating destination directory, so it's putting it in the right place, and we'll check that in just a moment. Building an index, standard doclet version, etc., etc. So one of the things we can see here now is the name of our class .html, and that will create the web page of the comments for our file. Now, we didn't actually put in any Java comments. If you go look at the method, the class that we created, it doesn't even have normal comments. Maybe there's one down there, but it doesn't have any Java comments. And what we'll see in the output is that it will say there is no comment for the class. You didn't have a Java comment for the class. You didn't have a Java comment for your main method. You didn't have a Java comment for your double max. You didn't have a Java comment for your int max. So if you don't put Java comments, this tool will complain and say you did not put the comments there. If you make a mistake with the parameters, you have a parameter, for example, A, and you call it C, it will complain and say you don't have a comment for A, and you have a comment for C, and C doesn't exist in this parameter list. So there's a lot of information you can gather from reading these comments. Make sure you do. Any warnings here, you should be able to fix. Then it carries on to generate a couple of other things. Now, this is all to make all the web pages work. So that's extra things it generates. And then obviously we carry on to the rest of our batch program, which will then run the program and then exit out. So if we go look now at our Java.doc folder, sorry, docs folder, you'll see there is a Java.doc folder. And inside of there, there should be an index.html. Now I want to open up this in Edge. And you can see there we have the information for our specific class. So you can see the constructor. Obviously, we haven't written any documentation, but it does give us some defaults. So there's the constructor, there's our main method, there's our double max, our int max, and a couple of other methods. We'll talk about why these methods are here when we get to object orientation. But you can see it gives us detail of the different methods. Because we wrote no comments, there is no detail specified here. So let's go add some. So in my Wild West class, I want to add a class comment. So I'm going to put a comment right at the top. So this will be for the class itself. So that will be our general comment. Then remember, we can specify @author. And this will be the author tag that will get generated. And then we also can specify version. And this will be the version that will be specified. Then for our methods, I'm not going to go through every single one. Let's just do for one of the max methods. And if you are using something like Notepad++, you'll see that when I do a block comment and when I do a Java comment, there's slightly different color variation. So it might not be so clear on the projector. Those of you watching Blackboard can probably see the difference, unless you're colorblind, in which case I apologize. So there is a subtle difference. If you're using an IDE, it will be more of a difference. You can customize that difference, but there is a difference between the two. This block comment, only people who have the source code can have access to. This method, Java comment, anyone who has access to the Java documentation can read this without actually looking at the source code. So here, because this method takes in parameters, I'm going to put comments for each parameter. And I need to specify the name of the parameter I'm providing comment for. And the last thing I need to specify is the returns. Okay, like I said, I'm not going to type out everything because that's going to take too long. So now I'm going to run through the whole business of the batch file again. The batch file is going to, again, compile my code, run my Java doc, and output the running of the program. I'm going to put echo off again because I don't want to see all that other stuff. And one other thing I might want to do is just clear the screen before I run my batch file. Okay, so it ran everything. There was no issues that I can see. Okay, so compiling, obviously no issues. Going through the Java doc, I didn't specify comments for main. I didn't specify comments for my double max. Notice that the other comments saying no comment is gone now because I did specify comments for my class and I did specify comments for my int max. And then running the program and we can exit. So now if I go back to my web page for my actual comments of a class, obviously this hasn't refreshed because I need to refresh the page or open it up again. And now you can see the comments of the actual class. You can see the version, you can see the author. I didn't put any comments for the constructor, that's why it's still blank there. But if you look at the method, the int max, you can see there it tells me some information. If I click on it, it will give me more information for the detail of that. Now, this is a very simple example. When you do more complex classes, obviously you'll have more comments to type for each of the things available in that specific class. Okay, so that is the first part done. That's Java comments. The second type of documentation we're going to do this semester, no, you have not escaped it. It's called UML, and specifically UML class diagrams. Now, those of you who are doing informatics and will be progressing to informatics 3 in the future, you will be doing a lot of UML in informatics 3. So those of you just doing computer science, you're only touching the tip of the iceberg. So UML class diagrams, just a refresher on them. Not going to go into detail of how to draw it in a specific program. You use whatever you want to use. You can use DIA. I believe that's the program you were shown previously. I've seen other people use other tools. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me what tool you use. The only thing I require is your documentation, which is going to be your UML class diagram, needs to be provided to the submission on Eve in a PDF format, making sure that you follow the convention which is specified in the practical at the end on the reminder page. So with UML class diagrams, it's basically a sort of way to represent classes in a language agnostic way, which means we don't care what programming language it is. We want to specify classes and their relationships. Now, as we get onto relationships, when we get to object orientation and advanced object orientation, some of the notation here will be used a lot more. There will be examples in later lectures that use this specific notation, but here is the notation for you to notarize right now. So with class diagrams, for each class, it consists of 3 sections. The name of the class, attributes of the class, which is basically things the class contains, the class's state, object state, if you want to use something specific, and then the operations, which can then modify either the state or some other state that's available. We also have visibility modifiers that we can specify. So a plus is public visibility, a minus is private visibility, a hash is protected visibility, and a tilde. So the tilde is next to the 1 on the keyboard. It's above the backtick, and that's, you press shift and that will give you a tilde, and that's package visibility. So if you're looking at an example of a class diagram, this is a class called myClass. It has 2 attributes which are private. One of them is a string, one of them is an integer, and by default that is 0. We have a couple of other things here. We have a constructor. You can put the return type as the name of the class as well if you want to, but usually with constructors, we don't specify the return type. Then we have a method with a single parameter that takes an integer, returns a Boolean. Another method it takes in a double and returns a void. Obviously, this is just an example of one class. It doesn't give you all the different things, but what's more important is when you work with classes, usually there isn't just one. There's more than one that you have to worry about. And that's where relationships come into play. So there's different relationship types. As we get through the different levels of object orientation, we will discuss these types in more detail. So association just links to classes, and then you get stronger associations after that. There's something called dependencies, where one class uses another class but doesn't have any sort of other relationship. Then we have aggregation and composition, has a and owns a. You should have heard of this notation last year in 1B. Then we have generalization, which is a, and the new kind of relationship which we'll learn about now in Java is kind of, and that's a different type of relationship than generalization. And each one of these different relationships has their own symbolic notation, and you can take note of that in that symbolic column over there. Now, when you're drawing these different diagrams and you're drawing the relationships, make sure that the classes have the things pointing in the right direction. There is comments here indicating where it should touch where. And there's an example of using the different syntax all over the place. Now, some of these, obviously, we haven't discussed yet in Java, but you have done some of these concepts in C++, specifically abstract classes. Interfaces is something that we'll do in Java, so that's why we'll talk about that a bit later. And the other thing which might be new to you is the package notation. So same thing like namespaces, you group code together, and you can see there's a giant sort of package that wraps around the classes that belong together in a certain area of your code base. And you can see main lives on its own. It only has the main method, nothing else. And then everything else, all the other classes are related inside of a specific package container. So when you do practical 1, for example, we'll do practical, so we do packages in the next lecture, and then practical 1, which is due next week, you'll obviously have to do a UML class diagram, and one of the things you'll have to do in the UML class diagram is draw the classes in a specific package, so you're using syntax similar to the one you see right now. Okay, so that is the end of today's practical lecture. If there are any questions, I'm going to be here in the lab, in the venue here. You can come and ask me here. I will check Blackboard for some questions, but I have to stop the recording so it doesn't go on too long for those of you who want to download it and watch later. Otherwise, you can continue with your practical. Your assistants are busy marking your practical 0. They're obviously not in this venue right now. They are marking it in a different venue. And you can access them via Discord. If you haven't joined the Discord server, the link is on Eve under notices. You can join the Discord server. And if you have any issues with the marking, you can contact one of the assistants on that Discord server. All right, so I'm going to end the lecture now.